Hi, welcome to my video. So this video I'm going to be talking about, um, people think I'm back on Windows. I never left Windows. I told you people. I use Linux a lot, okay? But I also use Windows. I also use Mac OS. I also own Mac hardware. I have quite a bit of Mac hardware, to be honest. I have a couple of iMacs. I got a couple of Mac Minis. Um, so Yeah, I do own some Mac hardware, and I do run Mac OS. I also run Windows on my gaming PC and my other gaming PC. I built two of them. I was at a point where I was just running Linux until NVIDIA drivers just doesn't seem to want to work properly. And I'm tired of just using AMD GPUs, which are not the greatest GPUs out there. And I know people may argue and say that NVIDIA is crap, but for me personally, I think NVIDIA are great GPUs. My RX, my RTX 4060 is a great GPU, and it should not be just sitting there in a box in another room because I want to use Linux and I have to buy another graphic card to uh, get gaming to a fairly good experience with Wayland using AMD GPUs. So what I done is that I installed Windows on my main game PC, put back my RTX 4060 because it's a great GPU, and I'm running Final Fantasy 14 with that. And you know what? I am not complaining. Game works really well, looks really good. I have it in maximum settings, 60 frames per second. Yes, I like Windows. Works good for me, works good for gaming, and I have no problems running it on the system. It works really good. Do I think Windows is the greatest operating system in the world? No. Do I think Linux is? No. Do I think Mac OS? No. They all have their flaws, and they all do something great. All of them do. I like Mac OS because I like BSD. I like the Unix of BSD. I think it's a good system. I like the look of Mac OS. I think it looks great. I like the simplicity. I like the top bar. I like the dock. I like the global menus. I like the choice of icons. I like the way the system worked. I like the applications. I just like. I was a big fan of Next Step. A lot of it is Next Step, but it's just um, sort of Macintosh. But I find Macintosh kind of lost their way of what was cool about Macintosh. If you look at today's Macintosh, it's not how it was back in the 80s and 90s. I thought, Macintosh was actually pretty cool. It was weird and unique, but it was cool. Mac nowadays is it's sort of just boring and overpriced. But I do like the operating system. I do think, Mac OS does have some cool features, but it is quite locked down with all that Mac stuff, like trying to get you to stay within the ecosystem. I don't really like that, and that's another thing that Windows is trying to do a lot as well. Um, but Linux is no better. People think Linux is, the savior of everything, the most secure thing, the greatest operating system since sliced bread, and that is not the truth. Linux is good for a lot of things. I do like open source. I'm a big open source, you know, uh, we call that. I'm a big open source uh, advocate. I like open source. I promote it. I talk about it a lot. I am all for open source software. I'm all for the free software. And I like the philosophies of both sides. I like the philosophy of free software. I like the philosophy of open source software. I don't have any particular uh, feelings between both of them. I think just using software with the code being out there that you can modify and change and do whatever you want with the program, have more freedom with your application. I think that's a great thing. But nowadays, a lot of this philosophy is just sort of ignored, and people just use Linux because it's free to use and don't have to pay for a license. But then again, most people don't pay for a license for Windows either. So um, it's just out there, you know what I mean? It's just different. It's different. People want to be different. They want to be unique. They'll use Linux. They'll think it's cool. Like especially the younger generation. You're gonna think that it's cool to rice their desktop, use i3 or Hyperland, Arch Linux or NixOS and do the programming language in NixOS and thinking that they're some sort of mastermind or something. But you know, at the end of the day, I mean, it's fun to play around with Linux. It's a good system. I mean, it could be serious. It could be productive. It's not literally a hobbyist OS. It used to be back in the early days. Um, Linux was fun to play around with. I've been playing around Linux for 25 years, and I'm not coming back to Windows. I always use Windows, but I want to get off Windows because I do like Linux. I want Linux to be great. I think Linux has been around for a long time and they're still having problems with their display manager, or I mean their display server, which is called Wayland. And Wayland's been around for what, since 2008? They're still having problems nowadays. Like, what's going on with that? Also, the whole debate with calling it the new Linux. I think that people need to shut your mouth and just call it Linux because Linux sounds good. And when you hear Linux, you know what you're talking about. You're talking about everything in the system. I think Linux sounds good. I think Richard Stallman just got butthurt because Linux took off and was popular, and no one really cared much about the GNU project. And the reason why is because the way Richard Stallman talks to people, like you're dumb or something. Like I don't know. I do agree with a lot of things that he says. I do agree with what he's trying to say, like the crux of his views and his agenda in some ways. But I can't say I 100% agree with everything that Richard Stallman says. And I can't say 100% I agree with everything that Linus Trovlov, I don't know how to say his last name, Linus, the guy that created Linux. I don't agree with everything what he says either. But when he says NVIDIA, fuck you, true. But if you're using Windows, I mean, you don't have problems with NVIDIA drivers. I would say NVIDIA is kind of ignorant towards the Linux desktop or operating system, but at the same time, I think Linux is not doing so great either. You know, when it comes to the desktop, they need to really smarten up a lot. Like I find the desktop people, they're gonna like argue with me about this. Like those people are big fans of KDE. There's people big fans of GNOME. There's people big fans of their window manager, and they think that their rice is the greatest thing in the world. And I'm looking at all these people, and I'm like, you know what? Been there, done it. Been there, done it. I was a young pup using Linux, and people back in those days done the exact same thing. But I'm just saying it from experience, using Linux all these years, I'm sick of it because I'm thinking like I'm in my 40s and Linux still feels like it's in the same spot that it was in 2003. It got better. Like the GNOME got modernized, same as KDE, but at the same time, the features have been taken out. They took out desktop icons in GNOME, which was always in GNOME all these years. But as soon as GNOME 3 comes out, desktop icons disappear. As soon as GNOME 3 comes out, your system tray disappears. Was mostly in GNOME 4 or 40 now. They call it 40 for some odd reason. It is GNOME 4 because they call it GTK 4. So technically it's GNOME 4, but it's 40 now, apparently. Anyways, it's all stupid. And I think they need to put back features in GNOME. I don't think they should take out the system tray. I think the system tray is quite useful and is still in Mac and is still in Windows operating system to this day. So taking it out is just really not smart. And desktop icons is what makes a desktop. If you want to make a mobile operating system desktop, then do it for mobile, but don't put it on my desktop. Same for KDE. KDE has all the great features, but it's so buggy. Fix your problems, make it stable. Wayland, make it stable for NVIDIA. Stop making things bad for us. Also, make Wayland stable, make it better. It should be improved. It should be in a stable state. Why are we still using X11? Should we just have a completely new, you know, stack? Why does Windows and Mac OS can do it, but Linux people can't do it? If Linux is so great, why can't they build a good display server or a desktop stack, like like a desktop API stack for the Linux operating system? And BSD is a great system, but it's still also lacking a lot of things, like when it comes to Steam, gaming, and Discord. It's not really FreeBSD fault. It's a lot that not too much support from companies like Valve, because they do take interest in Linux, but not in FreeBSD. So therefore, there's not much support for FreeBSD, though a lot of companies could make it as a gaming system, because a lot of companies do take FreeBSD code and use it to their benefits, like Sony does this, and they take it and they make their own operating system for their PlayStation, and it's based on FreeBSD. If you guys did not know that, now you do. But I'm sure a lot of you nerds already know that. Anyways, I'm not sure if it's still based on FreeBSD, but it used to be. So I like FreeBSD. I would totally use it. I don't want to use Linux anymore. I have a computer that runs Nix OS, and I think Nix OS is a great Linux distribution. The problem with Linux, to me, I'm just don't want to use it no more. I want to use Mac, and I go back and forth with systems. So I don't hate Linux if I don't want to use it now. It's just that right now I think Linux is not in a good state, and I want to like make a point out there that when a system is not in good state and it's not no progress happening towards it, the desktop is not improving, the display server is not improving, that they're still using X11 code, and drivers are not being supported that well, especially when it comes to NVIDIA graphics. Um, and they have it all. They have all the drivers for it. I don't know why they're having problems with it's Wayland. They need to fix Wayland. They need to do something with their desktop. That's the biggest problem with Linux. And and until they fix that, I think Linux will never be a system that people like. It's really popular, but it's not at this point where it's like, whoa, this is getting way too good for everybody. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like scaring Microsoft. It's not scaring Mac OS. Like where Linux is right now, it's not really. It's popular, but not as popular as you may think it is. It's still a niche system, and there's nothing wrong with that, really. But the fact is, like, don't say it's the best operating system and it can do everything when Windows and Mac OS does circles around Linux easily. You move a window box in Windows or on Mac OS, see how smooth the transitions of their API of their desktop. Just like resize something, just move an application, snap things in place. Things are smooth in Windows. Things are smooth in Mac OS. Things like, maximize, minimize the transitions is very smooth. The animation is very smooth. I see a difference. Like, I'm not saying Linux is bad. It could be. It was worse in the past. I got a lot better when it comes to compositors, but still, it's not where I think it should be. Like Linux today should be really polished up. For the most part, it is a lot better than it used to be. But for 2024, I don't know. I think Linux should be way ahead than it is now. And I'm not too impressed. And until it really impresses me, I'll take interest back with it again. But for now, I'm just gonna stick with Windows and I'm gonna stick with Mac OS and FreeBSD and BSD systems in general, like OpenBSD, because I like Unix. I like a Unix system. That's why I like Mac OS a lot because of the Darwin system, and I do like the interface. I think Mac OS is a nice desktop. I do think it personally it is, and I also think Windows is nice. I think Windows needs a little polish because I think it's still transitioning from the old generation of Windows, and I think that it is really trying to become more of its own thing. And I think Windows 12 will resolve a lot of that. I think Windows 12 will look a lot better too as well. But Windows 11, I gotta say, it is a good step up from Windows 10. It does look good. It's less customizable, but I don't really care about all that customization. I like a simple desktop that looks nice. I find Windows 11 looks good. It works really good. I wish I could run it on my Dell computer, but my Dell computer is not supported by Windows. I that's one thing I could say I do not like about Windows. What they did with Windows 11 is that they dropped some support for some CPUs. The i7 7700 is capable of running Windows 11, and it has no issues whatsoever. I don't see why they dropped, the seventh generation of Intel chipsets. Is it seventh generation? Does it go by the number of the CPU? I don't know. But the i7 7700 is capable of running Windows because I actually run Windows on it. Even though it's not compatible with it, I still ran on it. It still ran on it, but um, it only supports Windows 10. I could just put Windows 10 and see how that works as well. I might do that after this video, just for fun, because I don't know. It's still supported, so I mean, I could use Windows 10 till next year, and hopefully, probably by then, I'll probably get another computer that will have Windows 11 support. But I'm gonna completely get off Linux. Like I said, like I don't see anything in Linux that's really I'm like wow. I mean, I find Linux is not a bad system, but when you use it so long and you have so much problems with it, even though it's running good, I don't know. Linux is boring nowadays. I actually think FreeBSD is more interesting. I think Haku could be a good system, but I think that the leadership of Haku, it's not they don't even have a leadership there. So I think that's the biggest problem with Haku. And also with Haku, it's still in beta stage. They don't focus on releasing this system to the public. It's more like a hobbyist system. But Haku does have has a lot of potential to become a very good operating system out there, like the BSDs and Linux. But the problem with Haku is that they don't have any, you know, uh, they're not advertising it or getting it out there. Like they're not, um, it's not organized. Let's just say, like I'm not saying that the developer is bad. They have one developer doing the system, but what I'm just trying to say is that it could be a lot better. It could be handled a lot better. Um, it should like make it more stable, cut all the things that are causing problems out of the system, keep it bare bone, release a stable 1.0 to the public. That way people can use it and you have other contributors that could actually put a lot of things into it that would make it more useful system. But what it needs a stable, snappy foundation and a 1.0 release. That's what Haku needs. But overall, I think it's an interesting project. I do take interest by looking at it. I won't use it personally, but I have used the BOS system I used back in the late 90s, and it was a fun system to play around with in the 90s. Really fun because on those computers they were really super slow back then. But back then that was what I consider was a modern computer with modern specs. But you look at it today, it's like, man, those things were pretty slow. But with the BOS, like that desktop ran so well on these old computers. Well, on those computers, it ran so good because like Windows 98 and 95. Yeah. But anyways, like what I'm trying to say is that BOS ran pretty good, and the Haku system is basically a BOS sort of clone of the BOS system. It's pretty much what it is. It kind of took over BOS because BOS is dead, so it was a proprietary desktop. I think you can use like the desktop, but there was like a pro version of it as well that you had to pay for. I remember I used to play around with BOS a lot, but the sound never works, so I never really stick with it. Plus, the web browser that they had with it didn't really function too well for the internet. And back then, we didn't use the internet like how we use it nowadays. Like, internet is like really a necessity, but back then it was just, it was just something cool to have, but you didn't really need the internet because most people just use computers just because they don't want to use computers. Nowadays everything is dependent on internet, just like Linux. They say Mac OS you need the internet for it to function, but you need the internet for Linux to function. You need the internet for Windows to function. If you want to continue with updates, I think all these operators are very dependent on the internet, and without the internet these desktops will probably, I guess, if you have no internet, there won't be any farmability because they're not online. So therefore, you don't really need the updates if But what I'm trying to say is that all these packages to get all these programs, you need the internet. It's all dependent on the internet nowadays, which is good and which is kind of not good, I guess. But then again, back then, things were sold on CDs, and you had to get Linux on a CD-ROM, and sometimes they were like 3 discs, just because of the software you couldn't download off the internet. So you had it all bundled in a bunch of CDs, which I remember those days, like Slackware, not Slackware, was it SUSE? SUSE Enterprise? I think it was SUSE. SUSE, OpenSUSE. Well, it was called SUSE back then. Oh, SUSE Enterprise, I think it was called. It required DVDs, two DVDs, not CDRs, like DVD-Rs, two of them. I remember I had two DVD-R discs for SUSE Enterprise, and back then it was free to use. I think I don't remember, but it was free to download. So I mean, I got to try it out, but I didn't really stick with SUSE. I don't really, not really a SUSE person, but I really like Fedora a lot, and I do like Ubuntu. Those were the two systems that really got me to stick with Linux. I use other distributions like Canopix was okay. I actually had it on my desktop for a while, but I couldn't really use, like, I had one computer back then, so I had to either use Windows or Linux, and I used Windows because that's what worked the best on my computer hardware. But I had Canopus working pretty good on the computer I had at the time, and I gotta say, Canopus was pretty good. But I went back to Windows because of a lot of incompatibility with software, and software that I love to use on Windows I couldn't use on Linux, and gaming on Linux was not good at all back in the day, especially in the early 2000s. So, um, but I actually use Linux a lot. People see my video and say, "Oh, you're back in Windows. You're a traitor and all this stuff." You know what, man? I use Linux more than I ever used Windows in the 2000s. Like in the 21st century, I would say I use mostly Linux than I did with Windows. I always have Windows on some computers because I do have quite a lot of computers, but I mainly use Linux. I love Linux. Like if I'm fed up with it and I'm tired with it, it's because I use it so much and I see that it has so much potential to become a lot better than it is now. And I think the community focus on too much of utter politics bullshit instead of the system itself. And you can see that it's hurting Linux. You can see that it's slowing down the project because Linux in 2024 is not at all impressive. I am not impressed with Linux at all. With the vulnerabilities that it came with this year, not impressed. With the lack of Wayland support, it's not improving. It improved a little bit, but it's still pretty bad. They improved the drivers for NVIDIA. It's still bad though. I think Linux can do better, can be better. It should be better. Like Linux has been around since 1991. Okay, we're in 2024, and it's still not even close to 10% of the desktop market share of a commonly used desktop by the people. It's not even 5%. So what did that tell you guys? It's not in a good state. Linux is not in a good state right now. It hasn't been for many years. And I've been pretty fed up with Linux for the last 4 years. And I think that it needs a good kick in the ass. So for me, I'm gonna stop using Linux. I'm just one person, but I'm fed up with Linux and I'm gonna stick with Windows and Mac OS until I see major improvements with the desktop with Linux. But until now, I don't want to use it. Doesn't mean that I'm gonna stop using Linux because I always do use Linux anyways. Even though I say I ain't gonna use, I'm gonna be still using Linux. I'm just not gonna be really putting a lot of effort and time and me talking about it because I don't see anything exciting going on with Linux other than Cosmic, the desktop. It's in alpha, and hopefully it becomes really good and it saves Linux desktop. Hopefully it actually makes Linux better in the future. But as of right now, everything is alpha, beta, you know, WIP. That's what Linux is. It's been like that for the last 30, 40 years that it's been around. So, like over 30 years right now. Almost 40 years. It's getting there. It's been around for a while. It's been around since 91. So, yeah. I mean, yeah, it's been around since 91, but it hasn't been become a desktop, what, like 93. So, over 30 years for sure. And as a Linux desktop system, and then it still feels like it's in development. Like it's not, well, it is production, but it could be improved. Linux can be improved a lot for the desktop. It should be improved a lot for the desktop, and also they should use not the X11 stack because X11 is it's been dropped since 2012. There's not really any active development with X11. There's no developer that wants to maintain X11. It's a dead project. Even though people are still maintaining it, it's still a dead project. The project is people. I don't know. Like Linux needs to figure that out. Once they can figure the desktop out, I think Linux will be a good operating system. But as of right now, the desktop it's a really mess. It's a mess, and I'd rather just use a desktop that's not a mess. Windows may have some stupid features like AI stuff and all that crap, but it's stable. Windows is very stable, and it actually updates less than Linux does. Linux updates a lot. People complain about Windows always updating and rebooting all the time. I see Linux do this a lot more now than Windows used to be like that. but it improved that a lot. Like Windows don't get as much updates, and it's stable, a lot stable, and I find it looks pretty good. And it has all the features I like in a desktop. I like desktop icons. I like having a system tray. And I think Windows just works really good and has a lot of compatibility when it comes to drivers, devices, games, gaming. It's everything I like in an operating system, and that's why I use Windows. That's why I think it's a good system because it works good for me. It's not because I think it's better than Linux. No, it just works good for me. I love Linux because I think it's a good operating system. I think Linux has a lot of potential, but it's not there yet, and it doesn't work good for me because I have problems with it. And updating all the time with the system is not a good thing for me. It's not. And I don't want to use Debian stable and be on old software. I want to be on modern software and on a stable system that updates less. That's why I use NixOS. But other than that, I'm just not impressed with Linux. And until they impress me, I will be talking about it and be happy about it. But as of right now, I'm just not impressed. Anyway, guys, thanks for the watch. Hopefully that clears things out. Cheers.